Hello, in this video lecture, we're going to be covering procedures on the genitourinary system. And as we've seen, these are procedures that cover not only the urinary system, but both the male and female reproductive system. The root operations will vary depending on which of these root operations is being performed and what body part of the genitourinary system is being coated. With the body parts, we have laterality, as we can see in table 17.1. Let's take a look at that now. And again, here are our procedures. Note that the urinary system has distinct first two characters, as does the female reproductive system, as does the male reproductive system. However, in many cases, the root operations are the same. They include such things as bypassing, change, dilation, destruction, and so on. Please make sure that you understand this table before you do the assigned work for this week. And again, as we've seen in the table for the body part, there is a right, there is a left, there is bilateral, there is unspecified. The fifth character covers the approach. It could be open, it could be percutaneous, it could be percutaneous endoscopic, could be via natural artificial opening, could be via natural artificial opening using a scope, and so on. And the sixth character is the devices. The devices could be a drainage device, a monitoring device, extraluminal device, synthetic substitute, artificial sphincter, and so on. Finally, we have the seventh character, which is a qualifier. This tells us whether something is allogeneic, syngeneic, zooplastic, whether it was colocutaneous, and gives us a finer level of detail. Now we get into hemodialysis and kidney replacement, or kidney transplant, as we say. Hemodialysis is what is used for renal failure. And there's two main types of hemodialysis. We need to read the documentation to determine exactly what was being done. Intermittent hemodialysis, conventional treatment for end-stage renal disease, which usually goes on for 3 times a week for less than 6 hours. Prolonged renal replacement therapy is performed 6 to 18 hours a day, and it's a gentle form of dialysis for very ill patients. We may also see this documented as SLED for sustained low efficiency dialysis, or EDD for extended daily dialysis. And continuous renal replacement, or the CRRT, is performed for at least 18 hours, and this is the slowest and gentlest hemodialysis for patients with an acute kidney injury that's resulted in some sort of disturbance to kidney dysfunction. And there are different ways that these things can be documented: CVVH, CVVHD, or CVVHDF. So, in terms of hemodialysis, what exactly are we looking for? These are procedures that are included in extracorporeal or systemic assistance and the performance tables for the urinary body system. The fifth character would identify the duration or type of filtration, whether it's hemodialysis or renal replacement theory. And then we see some examples here. The 5A1D70Z for intermittent hemodialysis, 5A1D80Z, prolonged intermittent renal replacement therapy, and the 5A1D90Z, continuous renal replacement therapy. And that's all I have for you. Please contact me or see me during office hours if you have any questions about this material. Bye now.